What I want to do now is take you through a close reading of the opening passage of To Kill a Mockingbird. So we're going to look at the first few pages actually and do a close reading of it and start to think about some of the connections that we can maybe make between the genre, the historical background that Scout gives of her own family in the first page or two, and how does that connect to the Civil War? How does that connect to racism? How does it connect to Southern Gothic? How does it connect to the building novel genre? Okay, so let's take a look here at the opening section. We're going to do a close reading. We're going to go deep into the background, and we're going to look at the setting and some of the other details. All right, part 1, chapter 1. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. When it healed and Jem's fears of never being able to play football were assuaged, he was seldom self-conscious about his injury. His left arm was somewhat shorter than his right. When he stood or walked, the back of his hand was at right angles to his body, his thumb parallel to his thigh. He couldn't have cared less, so long as he could pass or punt. Now, we'll notice something here. At the very beginning of the novel, what do we learn? That Jem's arm got badly broken. That is really, really thick, so I'm going to change my size here. What happened? All right. Back to the beginning. Here we go. It decided to scroll to the very bottom of the book. So you just saw the end of the book by accident. Sorry. Okay, so what do we begin with? We begin with something that was badly broken. There's already brokenness in view here. And there's injury. Okay, so as we talked about in the Gothic genre, that brokenness is a common theme. And so the novel begins that something's not quite right. Something is not working the way that it should. And there's been brokenness, but apparently there's been violence of some sort, or damage. Let's keep going though. When enough years had gone by to enable us to look back on them, we sometimes discuss the events leading to his accident. I maintained that the Yules started it all, but Jem, who was 4 years my senior, said it started long before that. He said it began the summer Dill came to us, when Dill first gave us the idea of making Boo Radley come out. So notice that it's when enough years had gone by. This propping the book up, or the tablet up with a book, is not helpful. All right. When enough years had gone by, so it means that this is Old Scout. We'll make Old Scout wear a dress because everybody was trying to make her wear a dress. Okay, so this is actually mature Scout thinking back on her past childhood, and they're trying to ask the question, what caused this accident where Jem's arm got broken? Well, Scout says it was the Yules who started it. Jem says, no, it started before that. It's when we were trying to make Boo Radley come out. So we've got a connection between the Yules, Boo Radley, and an accident already. But Scout says if you want to take a broad view of the thing, it really began with who? Well, it began with this guy, Andrew Jackson. If General Jackson hadn't run the creeks up the creek, Simon Finch would never have paddled up the Alabama River. And where would we be if he hadn't? We were far too old to settle an argument with a fist fight, so we consulted Atticus. Our father said we were both right. So notice that they are far too old to fight at the point where Scout is writing this. Who's Andrew Jackson? Well, he's called a general, General Jackson. So he was a president of the United States. And he was also a general. What's that? That's a military commander during the Civil War in the United States. So when Civil War. So Jem's saying, well, if you think about it carefully, you got to go all the way back to basically the Civil War. Okay? Being Southerners, so they're from the southern USA. That's where Alabama is. It was a source of shame to some members of the family that we had no recorded ancestors on either side of the Battle of Hastings. All we had was Simon Finch, a fur-trapping apothecary from Cornwall, whose piety was exceeded only by his stinginess. That means wanting to save money. In England, so their family is from England, Simon was irritated by the persecution of those who called themselves Methodists at the hands of their more liberal brethren. And as Simon called himself a Methodist, he worked his way across the Atlantic Ocean to Philadelphia, thence to Jamaica, thence to Mobile, and up the St. Stephen's. So what's going on here? Well, they came from England originally. So we're getting a family history here. So how did they come to the southern U.S.? And just like our Gothic genre comes from England to the southern U.S., Scout's family originally, her great-grandfather here, or grandfather, came from England to the U.S. And what was he? He was irritated. He was bothered by this persecution. Well, what's that? That's bad treatment, persecution of those who called themselves Methodists. Okay, what's a Methodist? Well, it's a type of Christian denomination it's too long to write that word, Christian denomination, and they were not allowed to have freedom of religion in England because they didn't agree with the Church of England. Well, they were persecuted. They had problems. So they left their country and they went all the way to America because that's where they could supposedly get more freedom. So it then says, mindful of John Wesley's strictures. Okay, who's this? John Wesley. I'll show you a picture of him. There he is, John Wesley. Okay. He was the one who started a new Christian group, which were called the Methodists. So mindful of John Wesley's strictures on the use of many words in buying and selling, Simon made a pile of money, practicing medicine, but in this pursuit he was unhappy lest he be tempted into doing what he knew was not for the glory of God, as the putting on of gold and costly apparel. So Simon, having forgotten his teacher's dictum on the possession of human chattels, that means slaves. John Wesley said, no slavery. He was anti-slavery. But Scout's great-grandfather here, he forgot all about that. And so he bought 3 slaves with their aid, established a homestead on the banks of the Alabama River, some 40 miles above St. Stephen's. He returned to St. Stephen's only once to find a wife and with her establish a line that ran high to daughters. Simon lived an impressive age and died rich. All right. So we've got issues of coming up about the Civil War. We've got issues of slavery. We've got issues of wealth and becoming rich due to owning land and slaves. It was customary for men in the family to remain on Simon's homestead, Finch's Landing, and make their living from what? Cotton. Okay? That was a big, huge source of wealth in the southern U.S., which is why they wanted slaves, because the slaves would work in the cotton and the tobacco fields, as I mentioned in the other video. The place was self-sufficient, modest in comparison with the empires around it. The landing nevertheless produced everything required to sustain life except ice, wheat flour, and articles of clothing supplied by riverboats from Mobile. Simon would have regarded with impotent fury the disturbance between the north and the south. The disturbance between the north and the south. What's that? Well, that is the Civil War. Okay, notice there's a comic, humorous understatement here. Okay, so it's on purpose, a funny way of saying it, where she doesn't say it directly, but of course a child wouldn't talk like this, right? It's adult scout. Just calling the war a disturbance is a huge understatement. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people died. Brothers were fighting against brothers, killing each other. Okay? So they were on the wrong side of the war. They lost the war, as it left his descendants stripped of everything but their land, yet the tradition of living on the land remained unbroken until well into the 20th century, when my father, Atticus Finch, went to Montgomery to read law. And his younger brother went to Boston to study medicine. Their sister Alexandra was the Finch who remained at the Landing. She married a taciturn man who spent most of his time lying in a hammock by the river, wondering if his trot lines were full. So Atticus became a lawyer, his brother became a doctor. But they lost all their money and they kept their land after the Civil War. Okay, when my father was admitted to the bar, that means the law practice, he returned to Maycomb and began his practice. Maycomb, some 20 miles east of Finch's Landing, was the county seat of Maycomb County. Atticus' office in the courthouse contained little more than a hat rack, a spittoon, a checkerboard, and an unsullied code of Alabama. That's very important. Okay, we learn a little bit about Atticus here. His office is plain, and this unsullied code of Alabama means pure law. And that's going to be very important to Atticus, keeping the law, keeping the code of the law perfectly.